Well, most people are saying it's inevitable because, like you say, there's not enough revenue coming in. There's a hole in our budget, 12 billion at the moment that the minister has to close. So he has to find the money from somewhere. So some form of tax rise on the cards, and it's a bit unfortunate for our poor finance minister. It's his first speech, and he, unlike previous finance ministers, is unable to give us tax breaks, because if you look back, we've had quite significant tax breaks since democracy, since 1995, over a period of years, but the party seemingly over. Let's get a bit more analysis. I'm joined by Graham Molyneux from EY, a tax expert. Great to have you with us, Graham.
Thank you for having me.
So what tax are you expecting? Let's start with the possible wealth tax.
I think there are possible increases coming to wealth taxes. I think with the midterm budget policy statement making it very clear that we're looking at progressive tax policy, I think the wealthy are going to suffer the burden of this budget potentially.
And progressive is taxing the rich to help the poor disproportionately, so you don't have a sliding scale. Right now it's 40%. Some people are saying it could go up to 45%. That would be quite radical. Yeah. Others are saying maybe it should be radical. And I just want to put to you what the United Front, the people we can hear outside Parliament protesting at the moment, they're saying that the rich should be taxed, and if the richest were taxed according to their ability, government could raise 100 billion a year. But you'd really have to squeeze that top end to do that, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. I mean, I think a 45% tax rate has been put out there by a few commentators, maybe for earnings over R1 million, for example. Yeah. But I think the problem with that is that you only raise a fairly limited amount of tax in doing that, just at the very top end. I think a better way for the minister to look at it might be to say, a couple of % increase across the board.
Yes.
But then the challenge you face at that point is putting further squeeze on the middle classes. Already they're looking at electricity hikes and difficulty saving. I think this would probably put a little bit more squeeze on them and make savings and investment even more tricky.
Let's first put it into perspective, and then I want to ask you about a possible fuel levy increase, which is also widely expected. But tax of 40% at the top, our corporate tax 28%, our VAT 14%. On a global scale, are we extracting a lot of tax, or are things quite easy in South Africa and we could start pushing up those taxes?
I think from a corporate tax perspective, our rates are actually very high by global standards. The 28% tax rate. You've got to also take into account the dividends tax, which came in a few years ago at another 15% to shareholders investing into South Africa. From a personal tax rate perspective, I think our rates are broadly in line. I know some countries, particularly in the EU, have higher rates than that. I think those are in line. I think our VAT rate, interestingly, is actually on the low side. From an African perspective, an average of 16% across the continent is what you see. 21% in the EU on average, and we're at 14%. So,
but that's not popular because it'll hurt the poor.
It's a regressive tax rather than a progressive tax.
Do you think we could have a VAT increase, and what do you expect around the fuel levy?
I don't expect a VAT increase, to be perfectly honest with you, but I think if the time was going to be now for a VAT increase, this is really it. 1 year post general election, you've got 4 years till the next election to sort of let things simmer down.
Now.
You do things unpopular now. There was a sneaky hint last year, actually, that VAT might be going up, and that was some amendments that were posted last year. Dealing with the transitional arrangements for a VAT increase. Things like, what do you do if you signed a contract years ago and VAT rate changes? What happens to those contracts in terms of the forward-looking treatments and so on? So those sorts of amendments came in for the first time in over 15 years. So that's a very strong clue to me that government are looking at least at a possible VAT increase. Whether it's now is debatable, but certainly in the shortish term that it must be on the cards.
And the fuel levy, what are you expecting?
I think the fuel levy is a soft target for government to go after in this budget because of what oil prices have done in recent times. Ironically, they've just upticked very recently.
Well,
we're looking at an 80 cents.
Danger that oil can start going up again, our petrol price goes up again, and then you're burdening that middle class that you said is already under pressure.
I think we're looking at about an 80 cents a litre increase next month. You add on top of that, say, a 50 cent or 30 cent hike to the fuel levy. It's going to hammer the middle class's pockets. But I suppose, in saying that it's a progressive type of tax, because it's the owners of vehicles that are paying that tax, not the poor.
Most of it.
So that might make sense. I think that definitely is a soft spot, and I think that will be on the cards for this budget.
All right, so the only things that are certain in life, they say, is death and taxes. Thank you for your analysis, Graham Molyneux from EY. And we'll be expecting something to be said, some tax increases on the cards for the Finance Minister's budget this afternoon. And I must tell you, it's very interesting in Parliament right now. We have investors calling for constraint, calling for more revenue from taxes, but outside we have the United Front, a more left-leaning grouping of social groups, NUMSA, the former union from Cosatu, and they're calling for a very different budget today. No tax increases except for the rich. They're saying tax only the rich and spend to get this economy going. So the Finance Minister really buffeted by two different desires at the moment. We understand that the Minister is entering the chamber, and we are going to take you live to that right now, I understand. There you can see Minister Nhlanhla Nene walking towards, and I can tell you that you can still hear the protest outside, which is about 1,000 people from the United Front, mostly wearing yellow T-shirts, and they've brought a loudspeaker. So whatever the speakers are saying outside Parliament is floating around and drifting. It's very calm, it's very peaceful, but we can hear most of what's being said. And what they're protesting against is this anticipated austerity budget that our Finance Minister is expected to announce. They're pointing to the dangers of austerity. We can look at what's happened in Greece, for example, in Europe. A lot of people suffering because of the constraints, because of this decision to cut spending, to tighten things and stop taking on more debt. So interesting at Parliament right now, and I've bring you that budget speech live. It's back to studio, but join us again a little later live from Parliament.